The Corellian research vessel, Starseeker, drifted through the empty darkness of space, its sensors scanning for anything worth studying. Captain Velnara had spent 20 years collecting specimens from across the galaxy, and today felt like any other hunting expedition. The ship's alarm suddenly rang out across the bridge as they detected something unusual floating in the void. "What is it?" Velnara asked, her reptilian features showing mild interest. The Corellians were known throughout the galaxy for their cold, scientific approach to everything. Emotions were weaknesses that interfered with proper research. "Escape. Pod captain. Badly damaged. Life signs are weak but present," reported the navigation officer. The pod looked ancient by galactic standards, its metal hull scarred from micrometeor impacts and radiation exposure. Whatever had launched it was probably long dead by now. Velnara nodded. "Bring it aboard. Let's see what we've caught today." The cargo bay filled with the hiss of decontamination systems as the pod was hauled inside. When the bay doors sealed and atmosphere was restored, a team of researchers gathered around their prize. The pod's emergency systems had kept whoever was inside alive, but barely. Frost covered the small viewing window, making it impossible to see what lay within. Lead Scientist Morthek stepped forward with his cutting tools. The Corellian was older than most of his species. His scales dulled with age, but his mind still sharp as a blade. He had dissected creatures from hundreds of worlds, each one teaching him something new about life in the universe. This specimen would be no different. The pod's seal broke with a soft pop, releasing stale air into the cargo bay. Inside, curled up like a sleeping animal, was a small bipedal creature unlike anything in their databases. It appeared to be a juvenile, no more than 8 cycles old by most species standards. Its skin was pale from cold storage, and its breathing was shallow but steady. "Interesting," Morthek muttered, making notes on his data pad. "Mammalian, it seems. Bipedal. Brain case suggests higher intelligence. Let's get it to the specimen bay." The creature was carefully moved to one of the holding cells aboard the Starseeker. The ship's specimen facility was a maze of cages and containment units, each holding creatures from dozens of different worlds. Some were dangerous predators kept sedated, others were harmless herbivores that cowered in corners. All were subjects for Corellian research. Jinho woke up slowly, his 8-year-old mind struggling to make sense of where he was. The last thing he remembered was the colony ship, New Hope, shaking apart around him as the engines failed. His parents had shoved him into an escape pod just before the ship's hull cracked open like an egg. Now he found himself in a sterile metal cage surrounded by the sounds of alien creatures. Most children would have screamed or cried. Jinho did neither. He sat up carefully, his dark eyes taking in every detail of his prison. The walls were made of some kind of energy field that hummed softly. Beyond the barrier, he could see other cages holding things that definitely weren't human. Some looked like giant insects, others resembled walking plants, and a few defied any description at all. What caught the attention of his captors was how calmly Jinho observed everything. He didn't panic like most newly captured specimens. Instead, he watched the researchers with an intensity that made even the emotionless Corellians uncomfortable. There was something in those young eyes that suggested intelligence far beyond his apparent age. Morthek approached the containment field, data, pad in hand. The creature looked harmless enough, but experience had taught him that appearances could be deceiving. Some of the galaxy's most dangerous predators looked like innocent prey animals. "Can you understand me?" Morthek asked in Galactic Standard, the universal language used for trade and communication between species. Jinho tilted his head, processing the strange sounds. His parents had taught him some basic Galactic Standard during the long journey to their new colony world. The words came slowly, his pronunciation rough but understandable. Where are my parents?" Jinho asked, his voice small but steady. Morthek paused, stylus hovering over his datapad. Something about the child's speech patterns triggered a memory he couldn't quite place. The vocal rhythms, the way certain sounds were emphasized. It all felt strangely familiar, like an echo of something he'd heard before but couldn't remember when or where. Your parents are not here, Mortek replied simply. You are safe. We are going to study you. Jinho nodded as if this made perfect sense. What happened to my ship? The question surprised Mortek. Most specimens either couldn't communicate at all or were too terrified to ask coherent questions. This small creature was having a conversation as if they were discussing the weather. We found you in an escape pod. Your ship is gone, Mortek said, watching for the emotional breakdown that usually followed such news. Jinho was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he looked directly at Mortek with those calculating eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. What are you going to do with me? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mortek found himself hesitating, something that never happened during his research. There was something about this particular specimen that felt different from all the others, something that made him wonder if they had captured more than just another alien creature, something that would soon turn their understanding of the galaxy completely upside down. 3 days after Jinho's capture, researcher Zil Vox was hunched over her laboratory equipment in the deepest levels of the Starseeker. The Corellian scientist specialized in genetic analysis, spending her days unraveling the biological mysteries of species from across the galaxy. She had processed DNA from creatures so alien that they barely qualified as life by conventional standards, but today's sample was different. The genetic sequencer hummed quietly as it processed Jinho's blood sample. Zilvox expected to find the usual markers of a primitive species, simple genetic structures, limited evolutionary adaptations, maybe some interesting resistance to radiation or disease. What appeared on her screen instead made her freeze in disbelief. That can't be right, she whispered, staring at the complex genetic patterns displayed before her. The DNA structure was incredibly sophisticated, more advanced than any species currently known to galactic science. But what truly shocked her was the presence of specific genetic markers that she recognized from her archaeological studies. Years earlier, Zilvox had worked with xenoarchaeology teams studying ancient ruins scattered across the galaxy. These mysterious structures appeared on 17 different worlds, all sharing similar architectural styles and strange symbols that no one could translate. The ruins were old, older than any known civilization. Carbon dating suggested they were at least 50,000 years old, predating the rise of every major galactic power. What made these ruins even more puzzling was the presence of organic residue embedded in their walls. Tiny fragments of what appeared to be biological material, preserved by unknown technology. The genetic sequences extracted from these samples had been cataloged but never matched to any known species. Until now. Zilvox's hands shook as she cross-referenced Jinho's genetic profile with the ancient samples in her database. The match was perfect, not similar, identical. The small human child in their specimen bay shared the exact same genetic markers as whoever had built those ancient structures 50,000 years ago. She ran the analysis again, certain she had made an error. The results came back the same. A third time, using different equipment and fresh samples, still identical. The impossible was staring her in the face through lines of genetic code. Zilvox practically ran through the corridors of the Starseeker, clutching her datapad like it contained the secrets of the universe, which she was beginning to realize it might actually do. She found Mortek in his private laboratory, still puzzling over behavioral observations of their young captive. Mortek, you need to see this immediately, Zilvox said, her usual scientific calm completely abandoned. The genetic analysis of the specimen, it's incredible. Mortek looked up from his notes, annoyed at the interruption. What could possibly be so urgent about analyzing another primitive species? This, Zilvox said, shoving the datapad toward him. Look at the genetic markers. Cross-reference them with the archaeological database. Mortek's irritation faded as he studied the information. His experienced eyes quickly spotted the significance of what Zilvox had discovered. The genetic sequences were too complex for a primitive species, and the archaeological matches were undeniable. Run it again, he ordered, his voice tight with disbelief. Use fresh samples and different equipment, I want to be absolutely certain. For the next 6 hours, both scientists worked frantically to verify their findings. They used every piece of genetic analysis equipment aboard the ship, ran the data through multiple databases, and even contacted colleagues on other vessels to double-check their methodology. Every single test confirmed the same impossible conclusion. The small human child they had captured carried the genetic signature of the galaxy's most ancient and mysterious civilization. The builders of those inexplicable ruins hadn't vanished into extinction 50,000 years ago. They had simply disappeared, leaving behind only their magnificent structures and now apparently their descendants. The Great Silence, Morthek whispered, referring to the historical event when an advanced civilization had simply vanished from the galaxy overnight. No war, no natural disaster, no gradual decline. They were just gone, leaving behind only ruins and questions that had puzzled scholars for millennia. They didn't die out, Silvox said, staring at Jinho's genetic profile. They went somewhere. They hid. Morthek began pulling up star charts and databases, searching for any reference to a world called Earth that Jinho had mentioned. It took hours of searching through obscure astronomical records, but finally he found it. A small blue planet in an unremarkable star system on the outer rim of the galaxy, so far from major trade routes and galactic civilization that it might as well have been invisible. Brilliant, Morthek admitted grudgingly. If you wanted to disappear completely, hide your entire species from the galaxy, you couldn't pick a better location. No strategic value, no valuable resources, no reason for anyone to ever visit. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't originated on Earth as some primitive species slowly developing technology. They were the descendants of the galaxy's former rulers, hidden away on a forgotten world for reasons no one could understand. Jinho wasn't just another specimen. He was living proof that the most powerful civilization in galactic history was still out there. What do we do with this information? Silvox asked, suddenly realizing the magnitude of their discovery. Morthek stared at the data for a long moment, his scientific mind racing through possibilities. They had uncovered the greatest archaeological discovery in galactic history. They had found the missing link to an ancient mystery that had puzzled scholars for thousands of years. And it was all contained in the DNA of an 8-year-old child sitting in their specimen bay. "We need to contact the Galactic Council immediately," he said finally. "This changes everything we thought we knew about galactic history." Neither scientist realized that their discovery would soon trigger events that would shake the foundation of galactic civilization itself. The ancient powers they thought were safely buried in the past were about to wake up, and they would not be pleased to discover what had happened to one of their children. Something strange began happening across the galaxy the moment Jinho's genetic signature was fully analyzed aboard the Starseeker. It started small, a faint energy reading on a forgotten mining world, a brief power surge detected by automated sensors on an abandoned space station. But within hours, the events were cascading across dozens of star systems. On Kepler 442b, a dead world that had been strip-mined centuries ago, underground installations that no one knew existed suddenly blazed to life. The planet's surface cracked, open in perfect geometric patterns, revealing massive structures buried beneath layers of rock and sediment. Energy readings spiked so high that nearby trading vessels fled in panic, thinking the planet was about to explode. Mining foreman Kex Tolan watched in terror from his orbital platform as beams of pure light shot up from the planet's surface, creating a complex web of energy that reached into space. The beams weren't random. They formed patterns, geometric shapes that pulsed with purpose and intelligence. "Command, we have a situation here," Kex Tolan radioed to his corporate headquarters. "Kepler 442b it's doing something. The whole planet is lighting up like a star." Similar events were unfolding across the galaxy. On Proxima Centauri, ancient defense platforms that had been drifting in space for so long they were considered space junk suddenly powered up. There, weapon systems came online with the efficiency of machines that had never stopped working, despite 50,000 years of apparent dormancy. Trade routes that had been safe for millennia suddenly became danger zones as these mysterious platforms began scanning every ship that passed. The Galactic Council's emergency communication networks were flooded with reports from across civilized space. Ancient structures on 17 different worlds were awakening simultaneously, all responding to something that their designers had programmed eons ago. Whatever trigger they had been waiting for had finally been activated. Then came the messages. Every major communication hub in the galaxy received the same transmission at exactly the same moment. The message appeared in perfect translation for each species, not in galactic standard, but in their native languages, using phrases and concepts that suggested an intimate understanding of how each culture thought and communicated. The inheritor has been located, the message stated simply. Genetic authentication confirmed. Return him immediately or face protocol enforcement. This is not a request. The message was followed by precise coordinates, the exact location of the Corellian research vessel, Star Seeker. Someone, or something, knew exactly where Jin-Ho was and wanted him back. Meanwhile, aboard the Star Seeker, Jin-Ho was experiencing changes that no one could explain. The 8-year-old boy had begun having vivid dreams that left him exhausted but strangely excited. He dreamed of cities that floated among the stars, connected by bridges of pure energy. He saw technologies that made current galactic science look primitive, machines that could reshape matter at the molecular level, ships that traveled between dimensions instead of through normal space. But strangest of all, he dreamed of people who looked just like him. Humans, but not the struggling colonists he remembered from the New Hope. These were humans who commanded technologies beyond imagination, who had built wonders that spanned the galaxy before choosing to abandon it all. When Jin-Ho woke from these dreams, he found himself compulsively drawing on any surface he could find, using his fingernails on the metal walls of his cell, scratching in the dust on the floor, even using drops of his own blood when nothing else was available. The drawings were incredibly complex, circuit diagrams, mathematical equations, and symbols that seemed to pulse with meaning, even though no one could read them. Dr. Hai Jin, the ship's xenopsychologist, was the first to recognize what they were looking at. She had spent years studying the mysterious symbols found in ancient ruins across the galaxy, trying to understand their meaning and purpose. When she saw Jin-Ho's drawings, her blood went cold. These aren't random scribbles, she told Morthek urgently. These are technical diagrams. Look at this section here. It matches perfectly with symbols we found in the ruins on Vega Prime. And this pattern corresponds to the energy signatures we detected at the Centauri excavation site. Morthek studied the drawings more carefully. What he had dismissed as the artistic efforts of a disturbed child were actually detailed technical specifications. The mathematical formulas were beyond his understanding, but he could recognize engineering blueprints when he saw them. "What do you think they're for?" he asked. Dr. Hai Jin cross-referenced the symbols with her archaeological database, her expression growing more worried by the minute. "I think they're operational manuals," she said quietly. "Instructions for the systems that are waking up across the galaxy." As if responding to her words, the ship's communication array suddenly activated without anyone touching the controls. A message appeared on every screen aboard the Starseeker, written in perfect Corellian script. The inheritor must not be harmed. He carries the genetic keys to technologies you cannot comprehend. Return him to coordinates classified within 72 standard hours. Failure to comply will result in the activation of defensive protocols established during the Great Silence. This is your only warning. The message was accompanied by a star chart showing a course to Earth, the obscure little world that Jin-Ho called home. But according to the navigation data, the journey to Earth would take weeks at maximum speed. The deadline was impossible to meet. Captain Velnara stared at the message in growing alarm. Whatever they had stumbled into was far bigger than a simple specimen collection. The ancient civilization that had built those mysterious ruins wasn't extinct, and they were very much alive, and they were not happy that someone had taken one of their children. Jin-Ho continued drawing, his small hands moving with mechanical precision as he reproduced technical diagrams from dreams he didn't understand. Each symbol he created seemed to trigger responses from the awakening systems across the galaxy. as if he was somehow communicating with machines that had been waiting 50,000 years for his signal. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons. It was their absolute, uncompromising dedication to protecting their young. And Jin-Ho, whether he knew it or not, was about to become the center of a confrontation that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. The ancient protocols were awakening, and they had been designed by beings who understood that sometimes the best defense was an overwhelming offense. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within 6 hours of the first automated warnings, the fastest response time in the organization's 1,000-year history. Representatives from dozens of species filled the massive chamber on Nexus Prime, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, hisses, telepathic pulses, and translated speech. But for once, every single delegate was focused on the same terrifying problem. Reports continued flooding in from across known space. Ancient installations were powering up on 43 worlds and counting. Defense platforms that had been mistaken for space debris were suddenly bristling with weapons technology that made current military hardware look like primitive clubs. Most alarming of all, these systems seemed to be coordinating with each other across impossible distances, as if they were all part of one massive network. Counselor Rix Modal of the Corellian delegation stood before the assembled representatives, his reptilian features betraying none of the panic he felt inside. The Corellians prided themselves on logical thinking and scientific precision, but what was happening defied every rational explanation. Honored colleagues, Rix Modal began, his voice carrying across the chamber's translation systems, we face an unprecedented crisis. Ancient defense systems across the galaxy are activating simultaneously, all in response to what appears to be the capture of a single juvenile specimen aboard one of our research vessels. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembly. The idea that one small child could trigger such a massive response seemed absurd, but the evidence was undeniable. Every awakening installation was broadcasting the same coordinates, the exact location of the Starseeker. High Arbiter Kalvenin, the Council's supreme leader, raised one of her 4 arms for silence. The ancient Nexari had presided over galactic affairs for 3 centuries, and her wisdom was respected by every member species. But even she looked shaken by the magnitude of what they were facing. Show us the historical data, she commanded, her voice resonating with authority that had settled countless disputes between warring civilizations. The chamber's main display activated, showing archaeological surveys from the past millennium. Ruins on 17 different worlds, all bearing the same mysterious architectural style. The structures were massive, clearly built by a civilization with technology far beyond current galactic standards. For generations, scholars had debated who might have built them and why they had vanished so completely. Dr. Yix Colon, the Council's chief archaeologist, stepped forward with trembling tentacles. Honored Arbiter, we've discovered something extraordinary in our archives. These ruins aren't random structures, they're components of a single galaxy-spanning defense network. The mathematical precision of their placement suggests they were designed to provide complete coverage of all major star systems. The display shifted to show a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy, with the locations of ancient ruins marked in red. The pattern was unmistakable. They formed a perfect defensive grid, positioned to protect every inhabited world and major trade route. It was military planning on a scale that no current civilization could even imagine attempting. The genetic analysis from the captured specimen confirms our worst fears, Dr. Yix Colon continued. The child belongs to the same species that built these installations. The humans didn't disappear 50,000 years ago during the Great Silence. They chose to leave. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. The Great Silence was galactic history's greatest mystery, the sudden disappearance of an advanced civilization that had left behind only ruins and questions. Scholars had theorized everything from cosmic disasters to mass extinction events, but no one had considered the possibility that the vanishing had been voluntary. But why would they leave? Asked Ambassador Zet Terran of the Crystalline Consortium. If they possessed such advanced technology, why abandon it? Historical archives that had been dismissed as folklore were suddenly being examined with desperate intensity. Ancient texts spoke of a species that had grown weary of war, tired of the constant conflicts that plagued galactic civilization. According to these half-remembered stories, they had made a choice that seemed impossible to believe. They had deliberately forgotten their own technology and started over on a distant world. The evidence suggests they seated themselves on a planet called Earth, explained xenohistorian Pak Voren. They suppressed their own technological knowledge, allowed themselves to develop naturally from primitive beginnings. It was the ultimate form of pacifism, removing themselves from the galactic stage entirely. High Arbiter Calvenin studied the data with growing horror. You're telling us that humanity chose to become primitives? That they deliberately reduced themselves to a pre-technological state? The genetic evidence supports this theory, Pak Voren replied. The child's DNA contains dormant sequences that match the ancient builders, but most of his species' advanced capabilities appear to have been artificially suppressed. They didn't lose their knowledge through war or disaster. They chose to forget it. The chamber fell silent as the full magnitude of the situation became clear. For 50,000 years, the galaxy's most powerful civilizations had been expanding, conquering, and fighting for resources and territory. They had considered themselves the apex of galactic evolution, the rightful rulers of space. But all along, they had been living in a nursery, watched over by sleeping giants. The safeguards, whispered Counselor Vel Nixon of the Hive Collective. They left behind automated defenses to protect their experiment. The installations were designed to activate if anyone threatened their hidden colony. Or if anyone took one of their children, added Rix Modal grimly. The defensive installations weren't just powering up, they were preparing for war. Weapon systems that had been dormant for 50 millennia were running diagnostic tests. Energy signatures were spiking across multiple star systems, and most terrifying of all, some kind of communication network was activating between Earth and the ancient ruins. How long do we have? Asked High Arbiter Calvenin. The automated warnings gave us 72 hours, Rix Modal replied. But our fastest ships couldn't reach Earth in less than 3 weeks. The deadline is impossible to meet. Then, we're not meant to return the child ourselves, realized Dr. Yix Colon. We're meant to wait for them to come and collect him. The thought sent chills through every delegate present. If humanity had chosen to hide their advanced capabilities for 50,000 years, what would they reveal when forced to act? The defensive installations awakening across the galaxy were just the beginning. Automated systems designed to buy time while the real response was prepared. Honored colleagues, High Arbiter Calvenin said solemnly, we are about to discover what happens when you threaten the children of beings who once ruled the galaxy. I suggest we prepare for the return of humanity to the galactic stage and pray they are more merciful than we would be in their position. The Council had faced many crises over the centuries, but none quite like this. They were about to meet their predecessors, and the reunion was not going to be friendly. They appeared without warning on the third day, materializing out of empty space as if reality itself had been folded to deliver them. 7 ships, each one a masterpiece of engineering that defied every known law of physics. The largest Galactic Council dreadnoughts, vessels that could crack planets and intimidate entire star systems, suddenly looked like children's toys floating beside monuments to a forgotten age. The human fleet didn't announce their arrival with the usual bombardment of radio signals or diplomatic channels. They simply existed where moments before there had been nothing, their hulls gleaming with materials that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. No engine signatures, no energy readings that made sense to any scanner in the galaxy. They had traveled from Earth to this remote corner of space in less than 3 days, covering distances that should have taken months. Captain Velnara, of the Star Seeker, stood frozen on her bridge, staring at the display screens that showed vessels beyond her comprehension. Her own ship, which had been the pride of the Corellian research fleet, now felt like a primitive canoe bobbing next to ocean liners. The human ships were beautiful in a way that hurt to look at directly, their surfaces flowing like liquid metal while maintaining perfect structural integrity. Incoming transmission, reported her communications officer, his voice barely above a whisper. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a human woman who appeared to be in her 40s. She wore no military uniform, carried no visible weapons, and her expression showed no anger or hostility. If anything, she looked tired, like a parent who had been woken up in the middle of the night to deal with a problem she'd hoped never to face. "I am Admiral So-Young of the Earth Colonial Defense Force," she said simply. Her words translated perfectly into every language spoken by the mixed crews of ships throughout the system. "You have our child. We're here to collect him." There were EO. No demands, no threats, no ultimatums. Just a statement of fact delivered with the calm certainty of someone who knew that resistance was not just futile, but completely impossible. Admiral So-Young might as well have been asking for directions to the nearest star system. Captain Velnara found her voice after several long seconds. "Admiral, we are prepared to negotiate the release of the specimen. The Galactic Council has authorized." "There will be no negotiation," So-Young interrupted gently. "You took a child from his family. We're taking him home. That's the beginning and end of this conversation." To demonstrate their point, the human fleet began what could only be called a gentle display of absolute power. Every weapon system aboard the Star Seeker simply stopped working. Not damaged, not destroyed, but deactivated as if someone had flipped a switch. The ship's defensive shields flickered and died. Life support continued functioning, but every system designed for combat or defense went dark. The same thing happened to every Corellian vessel in the system. An entire battle fleet, representing the most advanced military technology the Corellians possessed, was rendered completely helpless in the span of seconds. No weapons fired, no violence occurred, but the message was unmistakably clear. Resistance was not an option. "How are you doing this?" Velnara asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "The same way we've been watching over this galaxy for 50,000 years, So-Young replied. "We built most of the technology you're using. Disabling it is simply a matter of asking it to stop." One of the human ships began moving toward the Starseeker, its approach so smooth it seemed to glide through space without any visible means of propulsion. As it drew closer, something impossible happened. The human vessel began to phase through the Corellian ship's energy shields, as if they were made of light instead of solid energy barriers. "Your shields are designed to stop weapons and debris," So-Young explained, watching Velnara's expression of disbelief. "They were never intended to stop the people who taught your ancestors how to build them." Deep in the specimen bay of the Starseeker, Jin-Ho had been watching the approaching human ships with growing excitement. The dreams that had been haunting him for days suddenly made perfect sense. These weren't nightmares or random visions. They were memories, genetic memories carried in his DNA and activated by his proximity to the awakening defense systems. Dr. He-Jin stood beside his containment cell, studying the complex diagrams he had been drawing on every available surface. The symbols were glowing now, actually glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with the approaching human vessels. "Those drawings," she said in wonder. "They're not just technical manuals. They're activation codes." Jin-Ho looked up at her with eyes that suddenly seemed far older than his 8 years. "They're coming for me," he said simply. "My people are coming." The human ship docked with the Starseeker, without any visible docking mechanism, the two vessels simply joining together, as if they had been designed to fit perfectly. Human soldiers appeared in the corridors, moving with purpose but showing no aggression toward the Corellian crew. They were there for one thing only: to collect their child and bring him home. When Jin-Ho was finally transferred to the human vessel, something extraordinary happened. The moment he stepped aboard, his genetic codes began unlocking dormant memories that had been suppressed for 50,000 years. Not just his own memories, but the collective knowledge of his species, stored in DNA sequences that were only now beginning to activate. Throughout the galaxy, the ancient defense installations began powering down, their job complete. The message had been delivered clearly. Humanity was no longer hiding. They had revealed themselves not as conquerors, returning to reclaim their empire, but as parents protecting their young. And there was no force in the universe more dangerous, more utterly implacable, than a species defending its children. Admiral So Young's final transmission went out to every corner of galactic civilization, broadcast on frequencies that reached even the most isolated worlds. "Humanity is resuming its place among the stars," she announced. "We return not as your rulers, but as your guardians. We ask only that you remember this lesson. A species that will cross the galaxy to protect one child will cross it again to protect any child. The age of conquest is over. The age of protection has begun." The 7 human ships disappeared as suddenly as they had arrived, taking Jinho home to Earth where his presence would trigger the restoration of humanity's full potential. The galaxy watched in awe and terror as the sleeping giants awakened, not to destroy but to defend. And every civilization that had ever threatened the innocent suddenly realized they had a new and infinitely patient enemy watching from the shadows of space. The humans had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same.